The night sky over Earth was quiet before everything changed. Commander Elena Brooks stood inside the command center of Sentinel-1, an orbital defense station high above the planet. She watched the stars and felt something strange deep in her chest. The sensors picked up movement beyond the moon, signals that grew stronger every second. The reports came fast. The Arkoth Dominion, the strongest military power in the galaxy, was coming to Earth. They were not sending scouts or diplomats. They were sending their greatest army. Elena looked at the monitor that showed hundreds of massive ships moving in formation. It looked like a wall of black metal covering the stars. Earth had never seen anything like it. Major Ryan Cole stood beside her. He was quiet, but his eyes were sharp. He had been in many battles on Earth before the nations united under one defense command. He knew fear and he knew how to fight it. He turned to Elena and said that this was it, that everything they trained for was about to be tested. Elena nodded and told him to activate the defense grid. Around the planet, thousands of satellites turned toward the incoming ships. On Earth, defense bases came alive. The world governments did not argue anymore. They were one army now, one people fighting for the same home. Humanity had learned its lesson from war and pain. They were ready. In the deep void of space, the Arkoth fleet moved closer. Their leader, General Vial, gave the order to begin the invasion. He spoke to his officers about how simple it would be, how the humans were weak and disorganized. They had enslaved dozens of worlds before and never failed. But Earth was not like the others. The humans had no empire, but they had something else. They had the will to survive no matter the cost. Elena ordered all systems to battle status. She watched the first enemy ships break through orbit. The defense satellites opened fire. Bright blue beams of energy cut through space, hitting the alien ships head-on. The first explosion lit up the sky. The humans cheered, but it was only the beginning. Ryan took command of the surface operations. He was calm but focused. He knew panic would kill more people than any weapon. He spoke to the commanders in North America, Asia, and Europe through the secure channel. He told them to stick to the plan, to trust their training. Across the world, rail cannons rose from underground silos. Anti-orbital missiles launched from the oceans. The sound was like thunder rolling across continents. For the first time in history, every human nation fought together under one banner. There were no borders now. There was only Earth. The first wave of Arkoth dropships entered the atmosphere. They were massive, covered in dark armor that glowed with red light. The aliens inside were confident. They had crushed every species that resisted them. But when they reached the skies over New York and Tokyo, they met a storm of fire. Earth's defense network tore through their formation. Thousands of humans on the ground watched as alien ships fell from the sky like burning meteors. The ground shook when they hit. Elena stood on the command deck, her hands tight on the console. She whispered that they could win this if they stayed strong. Ryan's voice came through the comms, saying that they would make sure of it. In the first 6 hours, the Arkoth lost more ships than in any invasion they had launched before. General Vale grew angry. He demanded more power to their weapons, more troops sent down to the surface. He believed the humans were lucky, not skilled. He wanted to prove that fear was stronger than courage. But every time he ordered another wave, the humans were waiting. In the deserts of Nevada, in the forests of Europe, and on the frozen plains of Siberia, soldiers fought side by side using technology that had been built in secret for decades. Humanity had prepared for the day someone might come from the stars to take their world. Now that day had come, and they were ready to defend it. Elena kept her focus even when the station shook from near hits. Sparks fell from the ceiling, but she did not move. Ryan reported that ground units were holding their lines. She told him that they needed to draw the enemy closer to Earth's gravity to weaken their shields. He said he would make it happen. Human pilots flew small, fast ships around the massive alien warcraft. They were outgunned but never stopped. They fought with everything they had. The sky above Earth turned into a sea of light and fire. As the battle raged, humanity saw what unity meant. Old soldiers who once fought against each other now shared ammunition and food. Engineers worked together to repair weapons. Families opened their homes to shelter soldiers. Every person on Earth did something to fight. For the first time, humanity was one heart beating with one purpose. The aliens had expected fear. What they found was fury. After 24 hours of constant battle, the Arkoth fleet began to retreat slightly to regroup. Elena knew they were not done yet. She looked at the burning horizon and whispered that this was only the start. Ryan came back to the command room covered in dust and sweat but still standing tall. He told her that the people would not break, that Earth was not the weak planet the aliens thought it was. Elena looked at the map of glowing red and blue signals, showing thousands of small battles happening across the planet. She said they would fight for every inch of it. As the night passed, the stars returned to the sky one by one. The smoke cleared enough for Elena to see the curve of the Earth below. She thought of how fragile it looked, how small compared to the vastness of space, yet it was still their home. Ryan stood beside her and said that the next day would be harder. She agreed, but she smiled. For the first time, humanity had stood together against the dark and refused to fall. The war was far from over, but that night proved something important. The greatest army in the galaxy had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they found the beginning of their end. The morning after the first attack was filled with smoke and silence across many cities of Earth. The skies that once shone blue were covered in ash and burning clouds. Commander Elena Brooks stood in the command center and watched the data screens that showed battle updates from around the world. The Arkoth were regrouping in orbit and preparing for a second assault. She could see their ships moving in new patterns, learning from their mistakes. They were not retreating. They were adapting. Major Ryan Cole walked in with tired eyes but a firm step. He told her that the defense lines in Europe and Asia were still holding, but the losses were heavy. He said the people were angry now, not afraid. That anger was turning into strength. Elena nodded and told him that they needed to use that strength wisely, or it would destroy them from within. In the ruins of Chicago, Captain Laura King and her small unit moved through the wreckage of fallen buildings. They were covered in dust and dirt, but they were alive. The Arkoth had landed in the city the night before, but were driven back by human soldiers using fast attacks and hidden tunnels. Laura led her team carefully through the streets. They carried scavenged weapons made from captured alien tech. One of her soldiers, a young man named Eric, asked her if they were really winning. She said they were still standing, and that was enough for now. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the city. The sky flickered with light as alien fighters clashed with human jets. The war was everywhere. On the other side of the world, in a desert base in Nevada, Ryan coordinated artillery strikes against alien landing zones. The ground trembled as massive cannons fired into the sky. He could see the alien ships falling like burning stones through the dust clouds. Soldiers cheered as each one fell. They were exhausted, but their spirits grew stronger with every victory. Ryan looked at the faces around him. Many were young and had never been in battle before this invasion. Yet none of them hesitated. They fought for their families, for their homes, for the right to stay free on their own planet. He sent a message to Elena telling her that Earth was holding, and that the aliens were losing momentum. In orbit, Elena received his message, but her eyes stayed on the radar. She saw a large Arkoth vessel breaking formation and moving toward the defense grid. It was bigger than anything they had seen before. She ordered all orbital platforms to target it. The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Beams of energy and kinetic rounds hit the alien ship until its shields began to flicker. But the Arkoth returned fire with brutal force. One of the human defense satellites exploded in a burst of light. The station shook as shockwaves hit it. Elena grabbed the rail to stay steady. She shouted to reroute power to the shields. The control room filled with alarms, but she refused to fall back. She told her crew to focus fire on the alien engines. Seconds later, the alien ship lost control and began to spin. It broke apart slowly before exploding in a flash that lit the atmosphere below. The humans cheered, but Elena stayed quiet. She knew the Arkoth would not stop until they tested every weakness humanity had. Meanwhile, on Earth, Laura and her team found an alien drop site outside the city. Craters and burning metal filled the ground. They moved carefully between the wrecks and found wounded aliens trying to regroup. The Arkoth were tall and powerful, their armor cracked and burning. Laura told her team to take cover and open fire. Plasma bolts and bullets tore through the air. The fight was quick and brutal. When it was over, the humans stood among the fallen. Eric looked at the alien bodies and said he never thought he would see the day when humans could beat something like them. Laura said they had no choice but to win. She sent a message back to command reporting the success of their ambush. Ryan received her message and smiled for the first time in days. He forwarded it to Elena with a note saying that the spirit of Earth was unbreakable. Elena read it and allowed herself a small moment of hope. But then another alert appeared on her screen. The Arkoth were sending reinforcements from deep space. More fleets were coming, larger than the first. She knew this was only the beginning of something far worse. She ordered the engineering teams to prepare the new defense upgrades. She told Ryan to start gathering every scientist and pilot they could find. Humanity had to evolve faster than the enemy could adapt. The next wave of invasion began before dawn. Thousands of alien ships entered the atmosphere at once. They came from every direction, trying to overwhelm the defenses. Ryan directed ground fire while Elena commanded from orbit. The sky was filled with light and death. Explosions turned night into day. Human fighters moved in tight formations, striking and disappearing before the enemy could react. On the ground, soldiers fought in streets, deserts, and forests. Civilians helped carry ammunition and treated the wounded. No one stood aside. Every person on Earth became a soldier in some way. In one battle near the Pacific coast, Ryan led a counterattack personally. He and his unit used captured alien tanks to strike the enemy's rear lines. The plan worked better than he hoped. The aliens were confused and broke formation. Ryan pushed forward until the sky above them cleared. When the battle ended, he stood in the smoking field and looked up at the stars. He wondered how many more waves would come and how long they could keep fighting. But he knew giving up was not an option. He sent another message to Elena, telling her that humanity had learned something the Arkoth never could. They did not fight because they wanted to conquer. They fought because they had everything to lose. When the day ended, Earth was still standing. The losses were heavy, but the people did not surrender. In the command center, Elena looked at the map of the world glowing with red and blue signals. She whispered that this planet would never belong to anyone else. Ryan's voice came through the comms saying they would make sure of it. Far above, in the silent dark, the broken remains of alien ships floated like ghosts around the Earth. The first great wave of the Arkoth army had failed, but humanity knew the war was far from over. The next battles would decide not only their future, but the fate of every world that still watched and hoped for freedom. The war had now entered its third month, and Earth looked different from before. The cities that once stood proud were broken but alive. People no longer waited for help. They built defenses, repaired weapons, and joined the fight in every way they could. Commander Elena Brooks watched from orbit as the Arkoth fleet sent more ships down to the surface. The alien armada was endless, yet every battle left them weaker. Major Ryan Cole worked day and night on the ground, leading operations across the continents. He had stopped sleeping for more than an hour at a time. The war had changed him and everyone around him. But what surprised the aliens the most was that no human ever stopped fighting. In the ruins of New York, Captain Laura King led her small group through collapsed streets filled with fire and smoke. Her team had turned the city into a maze of traps for the alien soldiers. They knew every tunnel, every alley, and every broken bridge. When the Arkoth troops entered the city, they were met with ambush after ambush. Laura's team used captured plasma weapons and homemade explosives. The aliens tried to adapt but could not keep up with the unpredictable human tactics. Eric, the youngest in her team, asked her if they were really making a difference. Laura told him that every alien they stopped was one less to hurt someone else. He smiled weakly and said that was enough for him. Across the ocean in Asia, human and alien forces clashed in mountains and valleys. Ryan coordinated with ground commanders through the comms. The Arkoth had brought giant walkers to crush resistance, machines that stood taller than buildings. Ryan studied their patterns and found a weakness. He ordered pilots to lure them into narrow passes where artillery could trap them. The plan worked. The mountains shook as the alien walkers fell. Human soldiers cheered as they watched the enemy machines collapse into dust. It was one of the few moments of joy they had seen in weeks. Ryan smiled for a second before turning back to his next order. There was no time to rest. In orbit, Elena faced a new problem. The defense grid was losing power. The Arkoth had found a way to disrupt Earth's satellites. She called the engineers and scientists who had been working non-stop since the war began. They told her they could reroute energy from old communication arrays. She told them to do it. Minutes later, the orbital cannons came back online and started firing again. She watched as the beams of light hit the alien ships that had started to close in. For every human loss, the aliens paid tenfold. But the price for humanity was still too high. Elena looked at the casualty list that grew longer by the hour. She whispered that they could not lose this fight, not after coming so far. Down on the surface, Laura's team found themselves surrounded in the remains of a subway tunnel. Alien forces were moving above them, searching the streets. The air was filled with the smell of dust and metal. Laura told her team to stay quiet. They could hear the aliens' heavy steps echoing above. Eric looked at her and asked what they should do. She said they wait for the right moment. When the alien patrol moved past, she gave the signal. Her team rose from the shadows and fired. The tunnel shook with the force of their attack. When it ended, the ground was covered in alien armor and smoke. Laura wiped the sweat from her face and told her team to move. There were still civilians trapped in the nearby shelters that needed help. Ryan received reports from Laura and other commanders that the alien troops were beginning to lose coordination. The Arkoth were not used to enemies that fought without order, that turned chaos into strategy. He used that to his advantage. He ordered small strike teams to move behind enemy lines and attack supply routes. It was dangerous work, but it worked. The aliens began to run out of resources faster than they expected. Human engineers learned how to repair and even use alien weapons. Factories hidden underground began to produce hybrid machines that used both human and alien technology. Humanity was adapting faster than anyone believed possible. In orbit, Elena received a transmission from the alien flagship. It was General Vial. His voice was deep and calm. He told her that humanity could not win, that they were only delaying the inevitable. He said that Earth would be turned into dust and all her people would be forgotten. Elena stared at the screen and told him that humans had survived everything their own kind had done to them, and that no alien could ever break them. Vial's expression did not change. He ended the transmission and ordered another full-scale bombardment. Elena gave the command to counterfire. The stars around Earth lit up with explosions as ships from both sides fell into the atmosphere. The light was so bright it could be seen from the ground like a second sunrise. On Earth, Laura's unit managed to rescue a group of civilians from the ruins. They were weak and scared but alive. She told them that the fight was not over yet, and that they would see victory soon. As they moved through the wreckage, she saw the sky burn above. She stopped for a moment and whispered that humanity was still here, and that it would never bow. Eric walked beside her and said he believed her. Ryan's voice came through the comms, ordering all ground units to hold their positions and prepare for the next strike. The enemy was starting to fall back in several regions. It was a small change, but it was the first sign that the war was turning. Elena coordinated the orbital attacks until the alien fleet finally began to break apart. She watched as several Arkoth ships lost control and fell into the ocean. The sight brought silence to the command room. The crew watched in awe. They had been fighting non-stop for months, and this was the first time they saw the enemy retreat. Elena took a deep breath and told them not to celebrate yet. The war was not over, but the hardest part might finally be behind them. Ryan sent her a message saying that humanity had done what no other species had ever done. They had forced the Arkoth to retreat. As the night came, the stars were visible again. The fires on Earth still burned, but under that light the people found hope. Laura and her team sat among the ruins, sharing the last of their rations. They talked quietly about their families and what they would do after the war. Ryan stood outside his command post and looked up at the sky. He thought of all the lives lost and all the battles still to come. Elena watched Earth from orbit, her reflection glowing in the glass. She whispered that the planet had earned its place among the stars. The war was not finished, but humanity had proven something no alien could deny. They were not prey. They were survivors. And they were only getting stronger. The smoke above Earth slowly began to clear, and the stars returned one by one. The great Arkoth fleet that once darkened the skies was now broken and scattered. Commander Elena Brooks stood in the control room of Sentinel-1 and watched the aftermath. The ships that once threatened to destroy her world were now floating wrecks. The surviving alien vessels tried to flee, but humanity was no longer the hunted. They were now the hunters. Major Ryan Cole led the counterattack from the surface, directing the remaining human forces to chase the enemy back into orbit. For the first time since the war began, Earth was not only defending itself but pushing forward. The long nights of fear were over. Now came the fight for vengeance. Ryan stood in the command tent built in the middle of a ruined alien landing zone. The ground was scorched black, the air still hot from battle. Around him, soldiers moved quickly, repairing tanks, loading weapons, and carrying supplies. He looked at the giant alien structures that now stood silent. These machines had once been symbols of power and terror. Now they were trophies. He gave orders for the engineering corps to study and salvage everything. Every piece of alien technology would now serve humanity. He believed the best way to win was to understand the enemy better than they understood themselves. In orbit, Elena was coordinating the cleanup of the debris field around Earth. The remains of alien ships drifted silently, glowing faintly as the sun rose behind them. Her team worked to collect what they could. She wanted the wrecks to be studied, but she also wanted to clear the skies for what was coming next. Humanity was preparing for a mission beyond Earth. For the first time in history, the United Human Fleet would leave the planet not in fear, but in pursuit. Elena received a report from Ryan that ground operations were almost complete. The remaining Arkoth troops were surrounded in several regions and surrendering or being eliminated. She nodded and sent back one word: advance. Captain Laura King was among the first selected for the new offensive mission. Her team had fought from the streets of New York to the ruins of Los Angeles. They had lost friends and seen entire cities destroyed, but they had never given up. When she received the order to prepare for launch, she simply said that it was about time. Her team boarded one of the new hybrid ships built with both human and alien technology. The engines glowed with blue and red light, a symbol of two worlds now merged into one weapon. The destination was the Arkoth command station hidden near the edge of the solar system. If they could destroy it, the war would finally turn in humanity's favor completely. Ryan met with Elena through a secure channel before the launch. His face was tired but determined. He told her that the people were ready and that they trusted her to lead them. She told him that trust went both ways and that he was the strength that kept Earth standing. There was a brief silence before she said that if they failed, the enemy would return stronger than before. He replied that failure was not an option anymore. The transmission ended and both returned to their duties. The time for talk was over. The human fleet left orbit with engines burning bright against the darkness of space. Elena watched from Sentinel-1 as hundreds of ships moved out together in perfect formation. It was a sight no human had ever seen before. They were not explorers this time. They were warriors. Laura's ship, the Vanguard, was among the lead vessels. Inside, her team checked weapons and systems. Eric, now more confident than before, told her that he never thought he would see the day when humans would chase aliens into space. She smiled and told him that history had changed forever. The journey to the outer solar system took several hours. The Arkoth station came into view as a massive black structure floating near the rings of Saturn. It was surrounded by smaller defense ships. The fleet formed a line and prepared for battle. Elena's voice came through the comms giving final orders. No one spoke after that. The silence was broken only by the sound of engines and the rising hum of weapon systems. Then, with a single command, the battle began. Human ships fired a storm of energy blasts and missiles. The Arkoth returned fire, but their formation was weaker than before. The humans had studied their tactics and found every flaw. For every ship humanity lost, 3 alien vessels fell. Ryan watched the live feed from Earth as the battle unfolded. He listened to the transmissions and updates from the fleet. When he heard that Laura's ship had broken through the outer defenses, he clenched his fists and whispered that they could do this. Elena directed the orbital strikes from Sentinel-1, guiding precision attacks from afar. The fleet fought as one force, united in purpose and spirit. Laura's team boarded the alien station under heavy fire. They moved through dark corridors filled with smoke and sparks. Every step was a fight. Eric covered their rear while Laura led the charge to the command core. Inside the station, the alien commander Vael watched his empire burn. He had never believed humans could be this dangerous. His people had ruled the stars for generations. Now he watched as everything they built was falling apart. He gave the order to activate the self-destruct system to take the humans with him. But before he could finish the command, Laura and her team burst into the control chamber. The fight was quick but fierce. Vael was stronger, but Laura was faster. She fired her weapon and hit the core behind him, causing an explosion that threw him to the ground. She shouted to her team to move as alarms filled the air. Elena received the signal that the enemy station was breaking apart. She ordered all ships to retreat from the blast radius. Through the viewing window of Sentinel-1, she saw the explosion bloom like a second sun over the rings of Saturn. It was the end of the Arkoth command. The remaining alien fleet scattered and fled into deep space. Humanity had won its first battle beyond Earth. Ryan stood on the ground, looking up at the bright light in the night sky, knowing it marked victory. He whispered that Earth was free at last. Laura's ship made it back safely, though damaged. She and her team were exhausted but alive. They were greeted with cheers and tears from everyone on board. Elena's voice came through the channel telling them that they had done more than save Earth. They had shown the entire galaxy what humans were capable of. Ryan sent a final message saying that it was time for the galaxy to learn to respect Earth. The war was not over yet, but the tide had turned completely. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. Now they were fighting to make sure no one would ever dare threaten their world again. The stars no longer belonged only to the old empires. They now belonged to humanity as well. The air above the battlefield was filled with smoke and fire as the last of the alien ships tried to retreat from Earth. But the human forces gave them no mercy because they had seen what those invaders did to cities and families, and they had no forgiveness left inside them. And Commander Ryan stood on the command deck of the warship Liberty and watched as the screens showed the destruction of the last mothership that had once threatened to wipe out all life on the planet. And he remembered how it all began when they said Earth would be easy prey, but now their arrogance was burned to ashes, and their technology lay broken in the mud of ruined fields, where human soldiers walked through the remains of alien armor and machines, and every survivor among them carried the same look in their eyes because they all knew they had done something the galaxy would never forget. And in that moment, Earth was no longer the weak world at the edge of space. It was a warning to every empire that thought it could conquer them, and as the Liberty flew low over the devastated coast, Ryan spoke to his second-in-command, Laura, who had fought beside him since the first invasion, and her voice was quiet as she asked if it was finally over, and Ryan said not yet because there were still enemy ships drifting beyond the orbit line, and he ordered the fleet to chase them down and finish it, so there would be no return, and the fleet responded with fire that lit up the night sky, and every explosion was like thunder rolling over the ocean. And below on the ground, soldiers raised their rifles and shouted, because they knew they had won something greater than survival. They had earned respect through fear and pain and blood, and as the fires burned out, the cities began to rise again because people came out from shelters and saw the ruins and said they would rebuild. Because that was what humans always did. They refused to stay broken. And even in the darkest hours, they found a way to stand. Again, and across the world, the radio waves carried one message repeated by leaders, soldiers and citizens alike, that Earth was free, and it would never kneel again. And far beyond the solar system, word of their victory spread across the stars, and races that once mocked humanity now watched with silence and unease, because they understood what it meant when a species that loved peace learned how to fight and win, and the Galactic Council that once sent armies against Earth now held emergency meetings to decide how to deal with the new power rising from the ashes, and they could not find a single answer, because no one knew how to fight a world that refused to die. And on one of the distant council worlds, a diplomat named Kor, who had once laughed at the idea of humans being dangerous, now watched a recording of the battle and whispered that they should never have come. And he was right, because there was no army left to send, and no fleet strong enough to test them again, and back on Earth. Commander Ryan stood on the shore watching the sunrise over the calm sea, and beside him Laura smiled for the first time in many months and said, "Maybe now we can rest." And Ryan looked at her and said, "Maybe, but deep down." He knew that rest would not last because somewhere out there others would see what happened and think they could do better. And he would be ready for that, because he had seen what humans could do when they were pushed to the edge, and he had seen how strong they became when they had something to protect, and he thought about the soldiers who did not make it back, and he promised quietly that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. And as the wind blew over the quiet waves, he felt a sense of peace mixed with determination, because humanity had faced the greatest army the galaxy had ever known, and not a single one survived. And now they would build something greater from the ruins, not just cities or ships, but a future where no one would dare to threaten them again. And above the clouds, the last of the alien debris burned as it entered the atmosphere and turned to dust. And Ryan watched it fall like fading stars, and said softly that it was over for now, and the world turned slowly toward a new dawn where humans walked among the ruins as victors and builders, and the galaxy watched in silence, knowing that Earth had changed forever, and that every empire that once looked down upon it would now remember the name of the world, where their greatest army had fallen, and where no one survived because humanity refused to surrender, and because they fought not for conquest, but for each other. and for the right to live free under their own sky, and in that truth lay their greatest strength. And as the light of the new day spread across the horizon, the people of Earth stood together and began again. Because that was what humans did. They endured, they rose, they rebuilt, and they never forgot.